So the rate of change has become so fast. It's like an HR team says, all right, here's how people are doing. We're dealing with the murder of George Floyd. No, now we're dealing with the election. No, now we're dealing with burnout. No, now we're
Oh
dealing
no.
with the great resignation. No, now we're dealing with the great reshuffle. No, now, and it's like the pace of change is so fast, nobody can get their feet underneath them.
All right, welcome to Vibe Check, a place where we have open, honest, and authentic conversations about the human side of business. Our goal here is to help you achieve better business outcomes with people-led initiatives. And to get there, there is only room for real talk and genuine advice. No sugarcoating allowed. So, I see you asking, what's a vibe check? Well, put simply, it's only a phrase for asking how you're doing really. It opens the door to meaningful conversations between colleagues, professionals, but most importantly, human beings. My name is Julie Janot, or JJ for short, and I am your host for this series. My mission in life is to help organizations understand the value of placing their people at the heart of their strategy and business. And that's exactly what you can expect from my Vibe Chat chats. Whew, that's a mouthful. Let's get right into it. Our guest today is Meredith Haberfeld. Meredith, hi, and welcome to Vibe Check. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for being here. So, Meredith, or Mer, as her team likes to call her, is the founder and CEO of ThinkHuman. Her daily mission is to work with leaders of all levels to fulfill on their vision of creating thriving, on fire culture and performance. So ThinkHuman is a manager training and leadership development company working to create an equitable and sustainable world where all being thrives. Don't we love that? So I'm going to put that very simply. What they do is manager training. So through their thoughtfully designed manager training and coaching programs, they partner with leaders to bring vision, intention, strategy, and a culture of support and purpose to life. They work with organizations such as Spotify and SoulCycle. As for Meredith herself, get ready for this. It's awesome. She's a speaker at SXSW, HR Uncubed, C2, and HR Transform. She also teaches at educational institutions like MIT and the Esalen Institute, among others, and she's a frequent expert for media outlets, including New York Times, Business Week, CNN, Forbes, Wall Street Journal. Want more? Like, this is so impressive. Oh my God. It's really a delight to have such an expert as yourself on today's episode. So welcome officially to Vibe Check, Meredith.
Thank you. Officially, I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. So as the tradition goes on Vibe Check, we will open today's episode, as we will also close it, with a quick Vibe Check. So the question is, Mer, how you doing, really?
Right now is a moment of lots of transitions in seasons. So I have a 12 and 13-year-old, and both of them are finishing school tomorrow. So I have kids coming out of school, going into summer break. My husband, Rob, is headed off on a trip for Alaska. Me and the kids are headed to Scandinavia. Like, we got a lot of comings and goings. So how I'm doing, really, I am like a traveler at heart. So I love all the comings and goings, but there's a lot of balls in the air. That's how I'm doing, really.
Does it feel overwhelming, or are you at peace with that?
It feels like ice skating, like wee, like a little out of control, but also a lot of fun. Yes.
It sounds like how I feel when I'm doing downhill skiing. I'm like, I'm not in control. I'm slightly having fun, but man, this is scary.
Yes, I would say some combination of there's some people that are very meticulous and organized about how all the things should be. That is not me. I'm like, I could head to the airport without knowing which plane or airport or, what the destination, and like, all right, let's go. Some things may not turn out, some balls may drop, and, that won't be good, and we'll have to do damage control. But I have like a high appreciation for uncertainty and the serendipity that comes with it, knowing that there is also some damage control along the way.
I love that. Fantastic. Thank you
and
for sharing.
How, JJ, are you doing, really?
I can relate to a lot of the things that you said. So, like you, I feel this is like in transition. So, in Montreal today, it's a beautiful, summery, hot day. I'm actually pretty warm. I'm sad I didn't turn on the AC in this room, but I'm not going to complain because, like you, I'm very grateful for this wonderful weather. Same thing, mom to three kids, two in grade 5 and one in first year of high school. There's lots going on. There's projects that are wrapping up, so I envy you. We still have a good 22 days of school to go. We finish at towards the end of June, so it's an intense time because it feels like a little bit of the vacation mode, right? So every night we're barbecuing, having beers in the backyard. It's great. We don't want to go to bed, but then I have to tell the kids like, let's go to bed because we have to study for the math exam still, and we want to be in tip-top shape for tomorrow. So it feels a little bit like I feel torn between the fact that we have to do things and the desire to do other things. But who can complain? Honestly, like I'm surrounded by a great husband, healthy kids, great spirits. I love my work, and I get to sit here to have this conversation with you today. So I'm really grateful and excited.
All right, I don't want to take too much time on this, but you made me think.
We have time.
You made me
Take the
think
time.
on the vibe check that how I'm doing really especially in the last 3 years, is like almost always a dimensional question. It's like, which cut do I want to come in at? And so right now I have like some inspiration about upcoming adventure and excitement about all the things. But there's also, as you were talking, it, for whatever reason, prompted for me that in the last 3 years, my awareness of the challenging things going on in the world, not that there haven't always been challenging things going on in the world, but my awareness of them is much higher in my conscious mind. So I'm like, I've got a bunch of things that I'm really happy about, and there's a bunch of really difficult things happening in the world at many different levels, whether that's related to race, or climate or war. So I have all the enthusiasm and inspiration about what's happening on the surface on top of kind of a lower level of anxiety about I don't know, heart pain for all the other things happening in the world. And I would say at any given moment, my check-in for the last few years has been that's at the foundation, and then whatever else is happening on the top.
I agree, and I can completely relate to what you're saying. There's always this multi-layered answer just because of this reality that we live in, and I think what you're referring to is like the importance of being in a state of mindfulness as to how you're feeling, what's on your mind, how what you're feeling is having an impact on your behaviors, how you're interacting with others, what you're doing, like with your hands and with your head and with your whole body. That's what comes to mind. Wow, I feel we could go on probably on this tangent here. Taking the analogy of skiing, like, oh, I'm going to take this route. It sounds like fun. Thank you for bringing that into our conversation. I think it's much needed.
I think it's a good segue into the conversation about work, because it's presumptuous of me to say this, but I think most people at work are experiencing some version of that. Like, we come in, and whether we're sitting at our desk in an in-person environment or logging into our computer to do whatever version of remote or hybrid work, it's like, okay, I'm bringing myself in whatever state of, goodness and presence on top of, there is a lot going on in the world, and just this kind of pervasive experience of how fast the world is changing, uncertainty about what that means, and the kind of awareness that used to be much more like, you got to put that away. Like, you're not allowed to, like, firstly, I don't think we had the, as much consciousness about it. And even for the consciousness that there was, I think there was a lot less room at work for people to have interconnection between who they are as a human and who they are at work. So I think it's just an interesting segue, because that's how all of us are showing up.
True. And it's a beautiful gift, as is, it's also incredibly challenging for people, for teams, for businesses. So you're right in saying that. And it is a perfect segue to the version of our whole selves at work in the context that we're in. And it's a perfect segue to the topic that we're going to be covering in today's episode. I'm so excited because it's probably one of my favorite things in the world to talk about. I probably am a little bit too passionate. So I'm I'm gonna maybe let you do a lot of that talking here because I love being challenged on different points of views and realities. Okay, so without further ado, we're gonna be talking about empowering managers in the performance management process. And I know this is something you also love to talk about. So let's see where the conversation takes us. But naturally, I'm gravitating towards starting to talking about the current state of performance management, like the what's working well, the problems that need fixing, the gaps that we're seeing. I'd love to hear you to start on that.
Um, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this is that people are focused a lot on the bells and whistles instead of like the heart of the issue. I think I heard a statistic that more than 50% of companies have redesigned their performance process. You might know the more specific stat, but more than 50% of companies have redesigned their performance management process in the last 2 years. So there's a lot of attention on the process, which I'm not saying that's not good. I think it is good to be looking at the process, but I think we got to get our attention to the heart before we can, but the heart or essence of what are we trying to accomplish before we can design systems that we're like, okay, good. Because most people also, the other stat I heard is that only 20% of people that have redesigned their systems or companies that have redesigned their performance management systems are satisfied with the result. So it's like all this effort and then not a high degree of satisfaction with the outcome. So I think where I would start is what is working is that there's kind of awareness and attention on how do we make this thing better and more impactful and productive. That's for sure working. Anytime we go to work on something, we don't expect it to just transform perfectly at our first cut. And I think what's not working is that there's a lot of attention on the bells and whistles instead of what are we really trying to accomplish here, and then designing the systems and processes and rituals around that once there's clarity about the essence.
I agree. And you talk a lot about attention, but we should also mention like there's a lot of time, money, and effort that's being spent on these redesigns. And
Yeah.
you cannot be more right. That's in my perspective. Who holds the truth? Who knows? But I'm seeing the same thing is before you start this redesign, you need to ask yourself a very important question, and it's super simple. It's why. Why are we doing this? What are we looking to achieve? And what are the expected or desired outcomes we're trying to reach? As our friend Simon Sinek would say, start with why. It's that simple. And don't keep that why just for yourself. If you're redesigning that as a management team, as a leadership team, the C-suite, communicate that why. Like if there's one thing you talk about, forget the bells and the whistles in the process. People will learn that in time. What's the most important thing is that they understand the why first. So yeah, I completely echo what you said.
I don't mean to be insulting about focusing on the bells and the whistles. Like obviously we have to get the bells and the whistles right. Like we have to have the right questions and we have to have the right rituals. But those are all built on top of, you're calling it the why, which I think is very accurate. And I think connected to that is what does success look like? And like at the level of its purpose, not at the level of its execution. Because success could look like 100% completion or some completion statistic or response rate or something like that. But direct reports may still be experiencing that they're not getting high quality feedback, or that managers are experiencing that the process doesn't support real impact or improvement. And you can't assess those things unless you are really clear what does success look like beyond response rates or metrics. Like what is our ultimate aim in accomplishing this purpose, and then designing the metrics from there.
You're right. And what that brings to mind is there is no other process inside, let's say, the HR realm, if we can put it that way, but the realm of leadership and people management that involves every single actor inside the organization. And that how I want to highlight how important it is, even at the why phase, to determine that why collectively. I know it may sound a little bit intense and probably overwhelming to some of the leaders listening in to this episode, but it's super important to get that input on defining what if we achieve that why, if we're successful at reaching that why, what does that mean for individual contributors, for managers of managers, for executive, for C-suite, for HR, for finance, like for all proportions and components of the business. I cannot insist on that more. And I think I'm seeing in speaking with organizations and HR leaders and conferences and events and just chit-chatting with our clients that that's something that's often missed as part of redesigning the process. So I guess that would be like a really strong advice, and what I've seen actually work. Organizations that succeed at doing this and have a high satisfaction rate and attain a level of effectiveness, and they reach their desired outcome. That's what they're doing in essence. We talked in the intro a little bit about the beautiful point that you brought in about the world that we now live in and the context, whether that be the economic landscape and the downturn that we're living in many parts of the world, the pandemic, post-pandemic, remote work, all of that. How have you seen these recent changes or this ever-evolving context of world having an impact on these performance management practices? What's your take?
I think a couple of things stand out to me. Number one, the pace of change is at this accelerated rate that human beings have just never seen in our human history. And so already the pace of change is super fast. And then with the new AI technologies coming into the foreground the way they are, we all know that the pace of change is going to happen even faster. So if I just look at HR processes prior to 2020, wasn't unreasonable to set a goal or focus for a half year and say, like, in this half year, this is what we are expecting. These are the things that we want to prioritize. This is what's important to people. And and some organizations were doing that for a year or longer. And I think what we've seen since 2020 is and I'm not just talking about OKRs, or goals, I'm talking about just like the landscape of what's happening in the world and how people are doing inside that landscape. So the rate of change has become so fast. It's like an HR team says, all right, here's how people are doing. We're dealing with the murder of George Floyd. No, now we're dealing with the election. No, now we're dealing with burnout. No, now we're dealing with the great resignation. No, now we're dealing with the great reshuffle. No, now, and it's like the pace of change is so fast, nobody can get their feet underneath them. So I think that's one, and it's going faster and faster. Creating pervasive burnout. Then I also think, I don't know if this is exactly your question, but that human connection is at a different, it's at a different fulcrum point than it has been before. The rates of anxiety higher, the rates of loneliness higher, people trying to find how and where are they getting productive, important human connection. And given that we spend the lion's share of our life at work, figuring out how that happens at work, I think is a really big question. So now, how has this changed the world of work? I think that prior to 2020, we saw it coming that work and life were blending. You saw offices starting to look more like living rooms and homes starting to look more like offices. Like there were flavors of this, but now the blend has become so pervasive that work now has to solve human issues that we didn't have to before, like connection, anxiety, uh, burnout, and those have become fundamental workplace questions that they weren't before.
Absolutely. I agree.
What do you,
And that's
what,
also
I just was going to ask, what are your thoughts on that question?
very similar thoughts. I remember a study that I ran. I sat down with team members and managers. I keep coming back to this study because it's changed the way I do my work. But we did that study at the close of 2021. So we were like into the pandemic pretty well. And that's exactly what our findings were. Pace of change, issues of connecting, trying to figure out how we do that, and a changing work landscape. So many things that were personal and related to your life at work are now becoming work issues and challenges. The work-life blend has evolved to, like, we've heard all sorts of declinations like work-life synergy and all of that, but it's one life. And I think that has a great side of it because it's unleashed, like it's opened the doors to talking about things we didn't talk about and weren't safe to talk about in the workplace before. We didn't check in on mental health and anxiety levels and stress level. It wasn't okay, or kind of weird to, like, we went from a world where you say you leave your personal life and emotions at the door, you're checking into work. Like these persons that live in one can no longer be separated. And I think that is beautiful because when you hire someone, you choose them for their whole selves. And they bring a ton of amazing things when you allow their whole selves to come to work. So I think that's exceptional. But I think, again, like what stands out to me is this constant search for balance. Like you said, we're constantly running. No one can ever get their feet under them. And so it all boils down to me to that constant quest for balance. A balanced level of, like, I'm working, but I'm also connecting with others. I spend time being fulfilled by things outside of work and by things that are connected to my work. I'm trying to find, like, I feel grounded while everything else around me is moving. For me, it all boils down to that. We're in constant search for that balance, and it feels beautiful and rich, but also very overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that it's also put new responsibilities on any team member who has a job and on managers. So anyone who has a job at any level is now managing their personal boundaries in a different way. Like, when does my work day end? And like where are those dividing lines? And puts a responsibility on managers too to capacity plan in a new and different way. 3 years ago, we were still living in a world where, like, to be a baller in a great company, you are, like, nose to the wall, giving everything you've got. There is no such thing as boundaries. And that was considered, like, aspirational, like, you want to work in a company like this, that's amazing. And now, I think even hyper-growth companies are navigating, how do we equip managers to do smart capacity planning so that they can have exceptional performers doing great work who then aren't fried at the end of a very short amount of time because they're doing this work on top of all these other stresses of life and the world today. And that idea of capacity planning I never saw it as such a high priority before, nor did I see individuals tasked with having to manage their own boundaries in this way, where it's like, well, I want to be a high performer, I want to give my all, but I also want to be able to have it be okay that on the evenings and the weekends, I'm not doing work unless it's an emergency. And I think that companies are working out new agreements around these things kind of implicitly. Like, what does it mean to be a high performer in this world?
Agreed. And I'll add to the capacity planning part. It's also brought to light a whole new set of skills that team members, individual contributors, and managers need to possess in this new working reality. And I think you're in a great position to talk about those new skills, or the skills of the future, power skills, as I like to call them. But I think we're going to dive into that a little bit later, because I know you have great points of view to share on that. I'd love to hear you a little bit on, like, bring in your crystal ball. Where do you feel performance management is headed? What's the future look like?
Well, we've seen it over the last couple of years moving in certain directions that I think it's going to continue, which is that it's more team member centric, it's more agile and flexible, and I think all those things are going to continue. You know, we've moved from the annual review to many companies switching to continuous feedback or some combination thereof, or multiple checkpoints. And I think that agility is going to keep the level of experimentation is going to continue about like what works and how do we do it effectively. In terms of team member centric, my real thought on this is that the term performance management is a little outdated. It's the best one we've got. I'm not knocking it, but it's a little outdated. And in order for people to do their best work, or in order for people to do great work, they need to be in great shape to do great work. And I think that that balance is, or that construct is becoming more in the foreground of, yes, people need to have clear goals. They need to be doing high quality work to deliver on those goals. But there's also a give and take in terms of, is this person being set up so that they can do their best work, and are they in great shape so that they can do that high quality work? And I think that these performance dialogues are becoming more and more two-way, more of a dialogue and less of a dump, and will continue to be that way. Now, it has to be, I know some people are probably rolling their eyes hearing that, like, oh my gosh, we hear already so much from people in terms of upward feedback. We want the company to be this way. I want my manager to be that way. And I hear from many leaders that it's like, all right, already, like, we hear you, but like, what's your role in the matter? And I think it is about shared accountability. And when that is off kilter, we, things don't work that well. I was thinking about dogs in the dog park where you see like one dog is on, like being the dominant one and then the other one, and then they're kind of like going back and forth. And when you see it go too far in one direction, you're like, okay, that is not healthy. Stop. Exactly. Yep. Stop the dogs. So I would say moving more in the realm of shared accountability is the biggest thing I see.
Agreed. It really feels to me that performance management is the crossroads to, it's no longer just performance management. It's not this one thing that you look at once a year. It's at the crossroad of so many different things, like company culture, like well-being. You talked about being in the right state to be doing the right work and the best work. So being your best self. It's crossroading with development, right? So it's no longer, I think if I've seen one thing in spending probably the first portion of last year, actually all of 2022, speaking with HR leaders, managers, team members around performance management, just discovering current practices, current pains, where they want to see this headed, because we're building this capacity within the Office Vibe product, right? So we've done a ton of research before doing that to really understand what we're dealing with. Is what I'm really seeing and hearing from all levels of leaders, including HR, is we're trying to shift from not just measuring performance, because there is a component of that. It is important for some reasons, more or less for some organizations, but shifting from measuring performance to recognizing performance. And I don't mean like only just recognition, like praise. I mean recognizing, seeing it, understanding it, defining it. So recognizing it and fueling it, which is the development part, right? They go hand in hand. And what I'm seeing is the same thing you are, is we're experimenting. We're trying different things because we're uncomfortable in this shift, and we're trying to figure out how to really do it. And I think that's a wonderful challenge for the world of work. This is why I'm so passionate about it. Do you want to add anything?
I do. You had me think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that at the top is achieving our potential or actualization. And as goofy as that might sound to some, like what does personal actualization have to do with work? It's such a huge motivator for human beings, and that when performance management can live at the crossroads of not only am I doing the things that the company needs me to do, but how am I fulfilling on my own potential, when we can bring the intersection of those two things together and people feel like they are actually growing from that process. And that year over year, they're like, okay, last year I was here. And I'm not at all talking about comp or rating. I'm talking about a person's own assessment of like, last year I was operating at this level, and this year I've grown in all of these ways that even if I were to leave the company, I get to take that with me. To me, when performance management is really working, not only is the company getting to see the benefit of that, but the team member is getting to see the benefit of that in a way that's lasting.
Exactly. And it should be a win-win. You want it to be a win-win, because when the employee is having their share of this, they're staying, like all the positive impacts that we know about, they're staying longer, they're developing, they're bringing more to your company. It can't just be about meeting organizational goals and fulfilling your role. This is a contract. It's an exchange. We're in a relationship together. You're making me grow. I'm making you grow. We're growing together. We're both reaping the benefits of those efforts and that commitment, right?
Totally. And I don't want to overlook, oh, sorry, am I cutting you off, JJ?
No, please.
I don't want to overlook the importance of that an individual has responsibilities to their role, their team, and the company. It's not just about like, oh, take care of making that person happy and feel good and that they're growing. No, it is a bi-directional relationship. And when a manager or a team isn't ensuring, I know we all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but when a manager isn't ensuring that somebody is really performing at the level needed or expected, it's bad for the whole organism, right? So like we're not doing anybody any favors, because like the whole is at risk at that point. So it really, to me, the focus is how do we build capacity and then rituals around that shared accountability.
Perfect segue. As like, it's almost magic that you said this word, because that's what I wanted to bring the conversation to, is let's talk about this shared accountability. And for that shared accountability to happen, every level or portion of the player in the inside the organization has a specific role. So I'd love for us to examine a little bit like the three levels: the team member's role, the manager's role, and HR role, the HR role in all of this. So maybe we start with the manager's role. I think it's probably one of the toughest, because they're caught in the middle. And it's at times a very fulfilling but also challenging position to be in. What are your thoughts on that? What's, like, put simply, what's the manager's role in this process in let's say fueling performance?
I think about the Venn diagram of what does the company need, how does this, what is like this team member's skills and strengths, and what are they passionate about? So I think about like the manager's role is understanding that Venn diagram and seeing that shared overlap. and being able to identify and hone in on that. And that takes that's like not a small thing. Especially, by the way, one of the pieces I've seen missing most often is the manager understanding what the company needs. Because over the last couple of years, I've seen managers kind of veer toward, well, like my team member wants this and they want to grow in this way and they're hoping for this. And it's like, okay, but we don't have a role at the company that does that, or we don't have a
There's
need
a
for that.
context here.
Yes,
You know?
exactly.
Yeah.
So number one is understanding and being able to articulate for the team member, this is what the company needs that overlaps with what your strengths and skills and passions are. And then being able to define success. So identifying that overlap, defining success in a really clear way. Like, what does getting an A at this look like? I would say actually that's one of my biggest weaknesses as a people leader, is being able to really clearly paint the picture of what does success look like. I'm like, it's over there, we're headed that direction. And people are like, okay, I see the vision. I might even be inspired. But like, as they get halfway there, they're like, am I on track? And I'm like, well, not really. And that was on me because I didn't paint a clear enough picture, even for myself, of what success looks like. So identifying that overlap, defining success, ensuring the conditions to be successful, I think are also the role of a manager. You can define success, but if the person isn't set up to win, that's on you as the manager. And then ongoing check-ins, and in those ongoing check-ins, the role of unblocking, providing support as needed, and steering back on track if needed or when needed, clear, unbiased feedback, and when there are breakdowns, using those breakdowns as an opportunity not just to get the result accomplished, but also to support growth for the person, growth for the processes, so that at the end, that manager can say once again, back to the shared accountability, that they had a hand in that it was successful, not taking any credit away from the direct report or team member, but that they had their part they had to play in all of those places.
I agree. I want to highlight, because this is a space for real talk, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing the things that you're not so good at. I think that's wonderful, and it's a trait I certainly look for in the leaders that I work with. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation. And I think it probably echoes with a lot of managers. Like, some are great at painting that vision, or I say managers, I could also say VPs and CEOs and all of that. They're great at inspiring, but with that comes a huge importance on continuously aligning on expectations, because to your point, great, they're motivated along the way. Is like, am I doing okay? Are you happy? Well, no, not really. Kind of like what you shared. And the way to fix that is constant check-ins, where the main goal is really, of course, to give the team member attention that they need. Like you said, remove blockers. So, but a way of doing that is using your check-ins, your one-on-ones, however you want to call them. Make sure they're really frequent, because the intent of doing this is making sure that your people are focused on the right thing, that you're still aligned and meeting the expectations, working in the same direction, reaching that same vision, and that if you're not, you're talking about it now. It really is important that it's now versus waiting it's too late. Hence, one of the issues with unfrequent performance management conversations, right?
Yeah, I don't want to jump the gun, but I think what you're bringing to the foreground right now is, I think ThinkHuman, we talk about accountability as being about alignment. The foundation of accountability is alignment, and that it's really just a series of alignment conversations, and that mostly people tend to think about accountability as something either where you're stepping on someone's neck, which is like not pleasant, or something to be avoided. Just like, I don't want to have those accountability conversations because there's something negative about them. Instead of in productive, blame-free accountability, we're having those alignment conversations every step of the way, so that we kind of break it down into 3 parts of, are we both, like the manager and the direct report, ensuring that the situation is set up to win? And so I have my role of creating clear goals. If I'm the manager, creating clear goals, that the person has what they need in order to be successful, that they know who the right players are, like that all the conditions are present so that they're set up to win.
Yeah.
And then that I track and coach along the way. I haven't like abdicated my responsibility. I am responsible even for setting up benchmarks for how do we ensure that you are on track so that we don't get so far down the line and go like, what the heck happened over there? And then lastly, in the third bucket, when and if there are breakdowns, using those breakdowns as an opportunity to grow people and processes. And underlying all of it is personal responsibility. And I say that like back to the manager's role. The manager's responsible for all three of those domains. Now, I said, like I might be jumping the gun over to the direct report or team member's responsibility. I think they have the responsibility for all three of those things also. For, am I set up to win? Like that's, even though that's my manager's job 100%, it's also my job 100% to make sure I'm set up to win to the best of every probing question I need to ask, so that I don't walk away going like, well, they didn't tell me that part and I didn't ask. It's like, well, to the full extent you are capable, yes. Ensuring you understand what does success look like and getting everything you need so you are set up to win, and then setting up those benchmarks along the way to ensure you're not going off track. So that's the tracking coach piece, and ensuring that along the way, if there is a breakdown, this is something I see so often, especially in organizations that are kind of lower psychological safety, is when something goes off track, riding on hope that you can fix it. Like, I'm going to try everything I can and I'm a strong performer, so maybe I can fix it, instead of raising the flag early and often to be like, yo, this is off track. Here, you need to know, here's what I'm doing to try to fix it. Not sure that that's the right thing. If you have other suggestions, to all stakeholders who need to know this is where that's at. And people tend to think, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen this, that will impact their reputation negatively, instead of that it does the opposite. It impacts people's reputation positively. Like, wow, thank goodness that they just threw that flag. Now we all know. But that is a team member's responsibility. And then lastly, when and if there are breakdowns, and there always are performance breakdowns of some sort, well, they happen, using those not just as something to survive or get through, but as an opportunity to grow.
Having a growth mindset is very useful here. Both for the manager, HR, whatever your role, the employee, same thing. If we're having that growth mindset together, working out as one team, it makes a world of difference. I love that you brought into the conversation the notion of psychological safety, because that's an enabler to everything that you mentioned actually happening. If you don't have that psychological safety, it's going to break down. It's the foundation to your house. If you don't have it, the walls are going to fall down. Focus on that first. And that's really hard. There's training on that, absolutely, which I think you're in a good position to speak about. Maybe you do want to talk about that?
Well, I think that in the realm of shared accountability, everyone has a role in creating safety and growth mindset. Once again, that there's shared accountability, but I think it's a good moment to talk about the role of HR, because I'm definitely not saying psychological safety is HR's job. However, HR is in a unique position to identify systemic issues and surface those issues and support the organization to, in a change management effort around those systemic issues, psychological safety, and, the presence or absence of experimentation and growth mindset. Like, those are things that if the HR team is clear, wow, this is like a systemic issue for us. It doesn't just live with that one person over there, supporting the organization to tell the truth about it, solution around it, and then be at work in a real change management initiative about it. I think that someone once said to me, it's kind of a silly statement, but so goes the sheriff, so goes the town, is the statement they said, meaning that if there are fundamental issues that are pervasive at the level of leadership, like a lack of psychological safety, or not operating with a growth mindset, you're not going to get better than that in a sustained way in other pockets of the organization. And so, I mean, you might get it in like a small place that's protected, but you're not going to see it virally spread across the organization if you don't have it in the senior leadership. So I always like to point attention there to say, before doing a million efforts in all sorts of different directions, identify what are the key issues to go to work on there. And if the senior leadership is not excited and interested and open in doing the work themselves, all the rest of the efforts I find are rather unsustaining. And it's like, you're kind of shouting into the wind, putting great, beautiful initiatives in place that are not so sustaining.
Yeah, the money spent, the time spent, the effort spent is going to be in vain. You're absolutely right about that. It needs to start at the top. Like within a family, if mommy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, daddy and daddy don't get along, don't have that psychological safety, that conversation, that space for trust, the conversations around building that trust and maintaining that trust, which is also hard. Kids, dogs, everyone around the family, the extended family are going to suffer from that. There's going to be rippling effects, I guess is the way to put it.
I used to, once upon a time, believe that manager training really needed to start at the top for the very reasons that we're talking about. But I've come around on that issue over the last decade or so. And the reason why is that what I have started to see that really fascinated me actually was that wherever you start as if the training enables key organizational issues being surfaced and exerting upward pressure, which not all manager training does, but if the manager training enables that, then that positive upward pressure starts to create new awareness and like positive, productive pressure on senior leaders to be like, all right, I don't know what's happening there and I don't know why, and maybe it's even a little annoying, but I keep hearing that there's something that we need to deal with. So now we need to deal with it. So it was a big awakening for me to see like, all right, we ultimately must make change in the senior leadership, but one way to do that is to start somewhere else and let it exert pressure upward.
Absolutely. Influencing from a bottom up approach also absolutely works if you don't. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it often is, uncomfortable, sometimes disruptive, but when we have leaders at the top that are open-minded and curious enough to ask and not tell, as you once taught me, it can actually lead to great things. Yes, it'll be uncomfortable, but if they have that skill of asking rather than telling, meaning they're curious to figure out like what is going on, and I hate the fact that we're looking down on it sounds like a hierarchy. It's not. You're looking around and saying like, what the heck is going on here? Please have the curiosity, if you're that top leader listening to this episode, to just ask a couple questions and then the rest will come. Love it. Let's talk a little bit about creating an environment that supports what we expect from our leaders. You and I have talked about this in the past in some previous conversations around the importance of like, yes, training's great, but you ask me a question when you say, what's the real behavior we're trying to change here? Like above just training people and getting them to acquire or develop new skills, what is it that we want to see change in terms of behavior? I want you to expand on that for the ears and the eyes of the people listening.
Well, this is a little counterintuitive given that ThinkHuman is a manager training organization, but I fundamentally don't think of us as in the training business, although we use training as a vehicle. We're really in the behavior building business. And the behavior building business has many different components. If you're really looking to embed behaviors in an organization, there is first establishing what are the norms and expectations and making those things clear. Then there's capacity building. Then there's the rituals, systems, processes that enforce or support that. Then there's identifying what are the incentives that are positively incentivizing that behavior, and most often what are the incentives that already exist in the organization that go against that behavior. So for example, if the senior leaders in an organization keep promoting people into manager positions who are not giving feedback and not creating psychological safety, it's like, well, then the incentive is clear. Like that's what I'm going to do, even if there's a written expectation and a training and a ritual. I'm not going to do those things if that's not what's getting incentivized. So having awareness around the whole behavioral ecosystem, the whole ecosystem that supports that, embedding that behavior, and training is one piece, we think a very important piece, but it's only one piece. And if you're not really clear what's the behavior you're looking to embed, skip the training. Just don't even do it. Sometimes people are like, the topics we want are these topics. And it's like, okay, not bad, but not impactful. Like, figure out what's the behavior you need to see. How are you going to measure that behavior is happening? And then let's work backwards to like the 80-20. What are the 20% of the interventions we can do that are going to be the most impactful 80% impact for that behavior, especially in the world right now of this uncertain economic climate where every HR and L&D team is being tasked to do more with less. It's like hiring freezes and reduced or frozen budgets for L&D, and yet you have to somehow create a miracle with, because we're not hiring people, you have to make everybody here do more. It's like, okay, well, in that moment more than ever, what are those key behaviors that we have to embed? And then what's the ecosystem that's going to support that behavior, including, those key things I talked about.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm so glad we talked about this art that is evolving towards desired behaviors, and the importance of defining what, as an organization, do we expect of our leaders, and what are concrete examples of what goes against those behavior or against those values that we have as an organization, and what supports them clearly, and continuously aligning on those expectations because of the context that we're in, because the pace of change is so rapidly evolving. It's easy to get lost. So it's a really thoughtful, intentional exercise that leadership teams need to do and have with managers leading the teams day in, day out, having such a meaningful impact on the employee experience. Let's get, I love sharing
real stories. Wait, before we move on, JJ?
Yes.
Wait, before we
please.
move on, I'm just interested in your thoughts on through the office vibe lens, how do you think about leadership behaviors, or embedding any key behaviors? Like, what's the lens you look through, you personally, and through your office vibe glasses?
Hold on, I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question properly.
Yeah, how do you think about how office vibe is supporting embedding key behaviors? How do you think about just embedding key behaviors in general? Like, what are the big pillars from your view?
I think it's at the foundation of how we built our product. So if I could resume, recap in one sentence what we're about, it's continuity, right? That's what we're promoting. So we're measuring employee engagement on a continuous basis with frequent surveys, not too many questions. We're driving constant feedback by providing that safe space for team members to share their needs, their expectations, share feedback on their experience, and to your point, how they are or not in a position or condition to be successful in their work. We've done the same around one-on-ones, which is probably one of my favorite tools. I think it's the most important vehicle a manager has for so many different reasons, right? Continuously aligning on expectations, providing feedback, providing guidance, setting clear goals, giving attention, supporting the team member, talking about engagement issues, life on the team, and all of that. We've promoted continuity in everything that we've done. Same thing for recognition, another vehicle for recognizing and fueling performance. It's the same thing. We've We've attached that to the Pulse survey so that we're able to create a habit, a behavior, a culture where it's something that's part of how we work and who we are, to continuously identify areas where our colleagues have made us proud, either for the work that they've accomplished or who they are as a person and what they're bringing into the organization and the lives of the people they're working day in and day out with. What am I missing? Goals, the same thing. It's that the foundation of how we built this feature. It's because we want to provide that continuous alignment between individual work, teamwork, and how that connects to organizational objectives and driving that sense of purpose. So yeah, at the base, our approach is really around, let's make all of these things, recognition, performance, alignment, feedback, and something that's continuous, that evolves and takes shape in how we interact with each other at work. Does that answer your question?
It
Properly?
does.
Is that what you had in mind?
Yeah. What I'm understanding when you say it, and I might be being too reductive, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like is that Office Vibe has kind of built itself to be a single place that supports all these rituals, and that it's hard to create rituals in an organization. Like it's hard to
Yes.
create rituals anywhere, like to create that habit formation, but by having in one place different avenues of support, this a ritual to support this behavior, a ritual to support that behavior, a ritual to support this
Yes.
behavior, a ritual to support that behavior, so that you're not having, have people kind of scattered all over the place in terms of like, I do this here and that there, but like a single point of entry to ritualize a whole bunch of key leadership behaviors.
Exactly. All things human at work in one place. I couldn't have put it better. I think you did it really, really well. Um, Probably a language thing. If I had to speak French, like I'm French, a French speaker, speaking from the heart, those answers come naturally for me. But I think I love that you asked that question, because it's when we're like deep down looking at our work and focusing on what the value that we're trying to deliver, we oftentimes forget to step back and look at the forest instead of just looking at the tree. And I love that you took me back to that and saying like, yeah, hold on, this is what really we're trying to do. And I love the lens at which you're looking at it, habit formation. And it is true, like through all of these continuous things that relate to our lives, I don't want to say at work, our lives altogether. Those are important elements, right? Engagement, recognition, constant feedback, building trust, building relationships. That's foundation of employee engagement. And we all know that that goes hand in hand with performance. All in one place to really transform, hopefully for the better, obviously, if those behaviors are adopted, the way we work together and how we create value, whether that's a product, service, a purpose, a mission, an impact on society, whatever you're bringing to the world, that we're doing that together collectively through really healthy rituals and habits would be, I guess, a way to rephrase all of that.
Um, the intersection that I'm noticing as we're talking is ThinkHuman as a company looking to embed behaviors through coaching and training, and Office Vibe embedding those through rituals. They really support one another. And
Yes.
one of the things that I don't know how this lives in the Office Vibe product, but one of the things I think is really impactful in the way that manager training can be done is when there is measurement at the beginning and end for the purpose of the learner, not for HR, but for the learner, to see like, how am I doing at this behavior right now, and then get a sense at the end of a learning journey about how am I doing at that behavior. Again, only for me. I'm not getting like, credit externally.
No.
It's not impacting my comp, but so that I can be in my own learning journey about, let's pick something, doing regular, consistent, growth-oriented developmental one-on-ones. Uh, we all know human beings, we have a sort of distorted self-perception, and we think of ourselves as like, I'm really good at X, which we sometimes are and are sometimes not, or even I'm really bad at X and sometimes are and sometimes aren't. So being able to get external feedback on perception from our direct reports and our manager on, am I doing this key leadership behavior consistently or not consistently at the beginning of a learning journey? And then being able to go to work at that, in ThinkHuman's case, oftentimes in a cohort learning experience with peer learning and coaching to support at the end of a journey, measuring again and saying like, well, how did I do? Like, again, not in a performative way, just for myself. Did I move the needle on actually creating a habit for myself? And so I'm just wondering, like, for the learners or the users, JJ, how does that work inside of Office Vibe? Like, how does it work specifically to know, am I doing key behaviors like regular one-on-ones or asking for upward feedback, or pick your function or behavior?
That's a great question. So I think I'll start by saying there's an opportunity here in what you're highlighting to make it absolutely better. We do have some core foundation or around understanding if that behavior has progressed and you've grown to meeting it better. One of the metrics that we tracked is relationship with manager, and that subdivides into communication, trust, and collaboration. So I bet you if you're better at displaying that key leadership behavior, there is a positive change in the score for that metric and those sub-metrics, even at the question level. So that's one way to have an indication. The feedback, the quality feedback that you're getting through the platform from your team as a manager is also a great indicator. One of the other things you can look at is the recognition. So our engine is called Good Vibes, right? So you get to send cards on a bunch of different leadership behaviors that we've identified, like showing up or being a positive leader. But organizations that are using Office Vibe can also create custom Good Vibe cards that align with their values. And we know how values are tied to expected behaviors, right?
Totally.
And so are you getting recognized by your own leaders, but also by your peers or your direct team members for those expected leadership behaviors associated to those Good Vibe cards? That could be a great indicator. And I see a huge potential maybe to allow for that manager to do that introspection and measurement, like you said, for their own self, for their own sense of progress and awareness. Before starting a journey, but there's so many pieces of the puzzle missing, right? Because we don't have learning embedded. It's coming, but we don't have that yet. So I think there's a world of opportunities and potential partnerships.
Wink, wink.
Further in the future for Office Vibe. But thank you so much for that question. I think it's a wonderful one.
Yeah.
I'd love, how about we end this wonderful conversation with some really like concrete stories. As I said, Vibe Check is about real, genuine talk, human advice. I'd love for you to share maybe a story, if you have one, about performance management. ThinkHuman, can you do that?
Yeah. I'm gonna change names for the purposes of just protecting, individual identities who didn't, volunteer to be
Of
shared
course.
about. But
Yeah.
one story that comes to mind is, I'll call the person Jane. Jane is somebody who came into ThinkHuman through our interview process, interviewed with a handful of people. We were knew what we were doing when we made this hire. And after 90 days, it was clear performance was on the fence. Not bad, but on the fence. This person got some feedback about what was wanted, needed, and went to work on those things. After another, I'm going to call it 6 weeks, it became clear the needle was not moving all that much as it related to those key areas. So there was this deeper conversation about are you really clear what's needed here? Do you have the support that's needed? And a few weeks into, like, after a turnaround conversation, what we saw was this person is like a values aligned person with the company and wants to work hard, but really is not a fit for this role. And shame on us, like, we made the hire, but before we just send this person packing, because there was a performance issue. They were not doing a good job in their role. We first looked at, do they have the right skills to potentially be really successful in a different role? And so we moved them from operations to content and thought, like, this is, it's not, and I really want to highlight, we were not saying, like, let's take a bad performer and just, like, shuffle them around the company. It was, let's take somebody who seems to really have different skills and, like, the right values and work ethic and see if those skills can be applied elsewhere. And a few, like, let's call it a quarter in, after a few feedback conversations, it was clear this person still, like, it was still not a fit for the role. They were not being effective. That didn't feel good to them. Jane, if I'll call her, she was frustrated. She's like, I'm, like, not feeling successful. Her manager obviously was frustrated. Even her team members were frustrated because they were having to absorb work. And there were many feedback conversations along the way. And to me, there were lots of coaching moments. The person felt supported. Jane felt supported. But in the end, we had a very real conversation of, like, listen, you're great, but your skills are not matching what we need here, but you're great. So let us help you find a role somewhere else that are really a fit for the things that both you want to do and that you have strengths at, and that we want to help you with that, because it's really on us that we thought you were the right fit. So it's not on you. Like, we wanted, and I think what it comes down to, like, why I'm telling this story, is that there were real conversations, like honesty present. There was not just once, was multiple over time. And then we have a real commitment to leave people better than before we met, to the extent we're able, not like in a saviorist kind of way, but just that, like, let us be responsible for leaving somebody, even if they're not a fit for the role or for the company, feeling great about their experience. And so, I can't say we've done that every single time, but to me, that is how I like to think about our model of performance management: is clear goals, real conversations, and leave people better than we found them.
I love that. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that story. I think it's inspiring and very touching. And
I keep wanting to ask you, JJ, what do you have one? What's your favorite performance management story?
Same thing. I could share gazillions of stories I've seen in my HR career. The ones that I've seen gone right have exactly what you mentioned: continuity, clarity on expectations, open, honest conversation where it's caring about the business, yes, because we have a job to do and expectations and roles to fill, but also doing right by our people and treating them like people, not bodies sitting in seats, right? It's about doing right for the business and for the people, and doing that in a sense of community, I think, is really incredibly important. And the stories that I've seen gone wrong ranges from many issues: the manager just not having the courage to raise the issues beforehand, the employee not clearly not doing their work properly or aligned with organizational behaviors. I've seen all types. People sitting there uncomfortable, not feeling well, like Jane was. It can be so boggling and uncomfortable of a situation to be in, and not saying anything about it to your manager for whatever reason. The manager not opening the floor for those conversations to happen, HR not doing a proper investigation and being a proper facilitator for those conversations to happen, either taking only the employee side of the story or the manager side of the story, where so much is uncovered when you actually sit down and discuss the whys around this situation. Without sharing any specifics, I guess the examples would be: done right is what you've done with Jane. Done none right is all of the things in the middle, and not owning up to everyone's accountability in that process, whether that's
Ooh,
the
I have
employee,
one.
HR, or managers. Ooh, yes.
I
I
have
love
one.
this.
You made me think of. I have one, uh, two performance management stories gone wrong that I'll share that were
Huh,
really illuminating for me. One, uh, actually, they have a similar nature to them, which was many performance conversations along the way, and
right.
then in the end, uh, we in the company hit a collective point of stopping to have those conversations, like not having the conversations with continuity. And so there were conversations, and then there weren't. And I want to say, like, between the person's manager and organizational leadership, we got more frustrated and made the decision it's time for it to be the end. And in the two that went wrong, I remember them well because I was the one to have the conversation, and I was very like matter of fact. It's time for
Yeah.
the love is gone, the job is done. Pack up
Done.
your
Yeah.
things, basically. And in hindsight, both people told me, because I'm like a person who generally operates with a lot of love. Both people told me in follow-on conversations within the following months, they were like, "That was such a bizarre experience because instead of having just like another real and human conversation, you were like, shut off the
Mhm.
love, it's all over, here's strictly business." And they were like, you weren't you anymore. You could like have the real
No.
conversation and still be you. And I had to hear it twice from, messing it up two different times before I was like, okay, there's like a gap for me there in being able to have a real performance conversation and still preserve my own humanness and
Yes.
not have it be like I was concerned, is that going to make it a legal issue because I just need to say like so few words. And I discovered, no, it doesn't. I can like operate by all the legal parameters and still be a human with my
Be
heart
human.
present. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I remember like creating scripts because not all managers are comfortable with like some never will in having those difficult conversations or even termination conversations I've witnessed. I remember doing scripts and saying like this is just to guide you, like prepare, and this is the points that we want to have come across, and remember to ask like, but be human. you know you're not like reading an ebook. You're talking to a real human being. You're trying to convey something. You want to show that you care. There is room to do and have those conversations in a human way. It makes me think, like, I was kind of hesitant to share this just because it might evoke emotions and PTSD, I guess, a little bit. But one of the things that I've seen in my career go really wrong is leaders and organizations tolerating performance issues that are connected to behaviors. Right. So as we said earlier, you have your organization values. That's your code of conduct, right? It sets expectations as to how you want to work inside your company, what's important to you, how those values come to life in the way you behave at work, right? And when you start noticing, or you hear about behaviors that are misaligned with those that are expected within your organization. Again, this is a contract. Those are or team or organizational norms. They are your values chart. It's so important. It defines who you are as a business and how you interact not only internally but also externally. So it has an impact on your business and your clients. Long story short, when you see behavior or get reports of a behavior that's counter to those values and you're not taking action, you're waiting. But then you hear from one person, oh, this is going on with this person, this is good. And then you hear from more people, and then you hear from more people, and more people call to talk about. And you're waiting before actually investigating this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And you're postponing those conversations with the person that is acting counter to those values and those behaviors. You're actually having so much negative impact on the people around. And yeah, I guess I'm stumbling a little bit and sharing that story
No, I'm
again because it is
so
very
with
close to
you,
me.
JJ. I
But
mean,
oh,
I
it was so. Please go ahead.
no, I'm sorry that you experienced that, and I can really, I've seen it so many times. It's
Yeah,
painful. And one of
it
the things I
hurts.
find fascinating about that situation is very often an organization will be engaged in spending time, energy, and money to have a positive culture. And
Yes.
then at the same time, enabling certain behaviors that go against the values. And I always think about that like pouring yourself into a garden, like the beautiful fertilizer and making sure it has
Yeah,
sunshine and watering it. And then once a day, someone comes stomping through the garden on the baby plants. And it's just like all the other efforts are out the window for whatever
exactly.
that behavior is that we tolerate. And I will say, as a CEO, it is um, it's not a no-brainer for me navigating those situations
No,
because
it's
sometimes,
hard.
yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
I either justify to myself like, is it really bad? I can't tell if
Yeah.
it's really
Is there
bad, and
really
that
something
person brings
here?
so much to the organization, and
They're a
it's
rock star bully, maybe, or maybe they're not. You know, like what's really happening here, which is
yeah,
why I'm stressing investigate this, really get to the bottom of it, especially if you're hearing it, even if you're hearing from one person that there's a negative experience, but even more so when you're hearing from several people, don't take your time. It's like if you're asking yourself these questions, like, really, I don't know, I'm not sure. Is this person really stomping
such a
on our
good
grass?
point.
Please take the time because if you don't, I swear to you, living example of that, it's gonna toxify your culture so quickly. So ask those questions regularly.
It's
Listen and watch for those behaviors constantly.
It's such a good point. And culture is like a sound in an echo chamber, like whatever the sound is gets amplified and reverberated. So whatever we're
Mhm.
allowing, it's not just like we like to think of it as in that one pocket, but now it's like, well, that's what's enabled or allowed. So that can just,
Right.
grow in its force. Yeah.
Okay. I don't, yeah, go, were you going to go somewhere?
I was just going to say, like, bringing it back to performance management, I think those
Yes.
behaviors become the job of the manager to
Yeah.
address. And sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes that manager is the CEO with their leadership team. Sometimes it's the manager of somebody who's a star performer. But I guess also for the L&D and HR leaders that are listening, uh, it's our role to make sure, as you said, JJ, to investigate and then enable and embolden people to have those performance conversations that are not just about, are you putting up the numbers or hitting your OKR,
No.
but the performance conversations about, are you embodying the values in a way that is true to who we are.
Exactly. Can you end this for us maybe on a word of advice? Because we talked about continuous conversations throughout our conversation. Um, can you share your tips on what I think is the manager's best tool ever, one-on-ones? How do you run them at ThinkHuman? Just
So we have, firstly, the agenda is a shared agenda but driven by the team member,
right?
and the one-on-one is what I would say is three general parts, and all three parts built on the same foundation. So those three parts are connect, unblock, and develop. So the part, like the three most important pieces, are creating that human connection. It's just like, individual to individual. How are you doing really?
Yeah.
And making space for that. Then the unblock is, what role does the manager have in, as the direct report comes and says, like, I need this unblocked, I'm struggling with this, I want coaching
Yeah.
around that, this thing is held up here and I could use some support getting it shaken free, so that's unblock. And then the last part, oh sorry, one more thing in unblock, also fits in upward feedback about the manager or about the company, where it's like these things will elevate my ability to be at my best. So creating the safety and space for people to communicate that in one-on-ones. And then lastly is develop and having the space in those one-on-one conversations for how does this person want to grow? How does that overlap with what the company needs? And having the person be clear about that. What are their key developmental goals so that they can grow in the ways that they are committed to? What's the coaching to support that? And open dialogue around development. And so I said there are 3 parts with one foundation, and that foundation underneath all 3 is psychological safety, trust building, and relationship investment. And so whether it's connecting, unblocking, or developing, all 3 of those pieces are built on having trust and safety and contribute to enhancing trust and safety. So that means all the transactional status work that has to get done has to happen somewhere else, not in the one-on-one, because the one-on-ones are really dedicated to that at ThinkHuman.
I love it. Could not be more aligned to this, both on a personal level and on the office vibe level. It stands exactly aligned to our beliefs. What a wonderful conversation this has been. So we must, as you hinted to it in your last point, end with a check-in with the vibe check question. I have to ask you, how you doing? Really?
Love talking to you, JJ. You give me many ideas. I get excited about the overlaps with Office Vibe and ThinkHuman. Don't know what or how that will carry us, but seems just interesting and compelling. And I think the biggest thing I am walking away from this conversation with is the piece of I talked a lot throughout the conversation, as did you, about shared accountability and personal responsibility of the manager. And what I am left thinking is just noticing the places that are a gap for me in personal responsibility for conversations that I haven't had, that or maybe that I've danced around, but that are the next level of real conversation is on the horizon. So that's what I'm walking away with. How are you doing? I know that wasn't exactly answering the how are you doing really, but that's what I was present to. How about you?
It's a perfect answer, I think. Because it's your answer. It's how you're feeling. It's what this conversation has left you thinking about. Same for me. I feel hopeful. I feel energized. I feel excited about the future because, as I said, opening the conversation, this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. And what I loved about our conversation, although we're strongly aligned in our views on this, I felt challenged in the questions that you asked. You brought me to a place of deep reflection and also personal experiences. And I'm grateful for that because I really, truly value those meaningful conversations and those human, challenging conversations because I have that growth mindset. I guess, born with it. At times I fall back and go to a fixed mindset and I don't know why. And then I'm surrounded by people I love, my husband, my friends, and people like you in my professional settings that in many ways become friends because they contribute to that growth that I'm looking for as a person. So I guess all that to say, this conversation has made me better. And I hope that's the case for you as well and for the people who will listen to this episode. Totally. And thank you.
Yeah, right back at you. Isn't it so satisfying for all of us when we find people that we're on a shared mission with and we might be coming at it on our own path, but a shared purpose and vision for the world. So really such an honor and joy to get to play with you, JJ.
Amazing. Thank you, Mare. Thank you for being with us and for being such an amazing and insightful guest.